Welcome, everyone, to Courageous Creative Conquerors. This is Jean Voice Dart. It's my belief that everyone has a gift of creative expression. We were born to express ourselves to stay healthy and happy. Whether you are planting a garden, writing a story, building a cabinet, sewing a scarf, or singing a song, what matters is expressing from the heart. And the creative and expressive arts are a healthy coping strategy that shifts us from trauma to triumph. So join me as we listen and learn key tips and techniques from our special guest and courageous creative conqueror. Our special guest today is Sally Betters, author, transformational grief and trauma coach, and storyteller. Hi, everybody. This is Jean Voice Dart with Courageous Creative Conquerors, and I'm very happy to say I have a special guest here with me, Sally Betters, and she's going to be talking about a subject that might be a little bit of a tender area for some folks, a sensitive topic. Childhood sexual trafficking, and you might want to move your children or those who would be sensitive to that out of the room. We're going to be discussing that and also her journey through that with her abilities as a grief and trauma coach and teacher and author. Welcome, Sally. I'm so glad to have you here.
Oh, thank you, Jean. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you very much. You know, we had our talk about a year and a half ago, and we really kept the focus on your books, your children's books, and what you had done in your life and your coaching business. But we didn't get into this topic. And I think it was probably because I was a little sensitive to it, and I didn't want to go into that because of my own personal journey. But I'm more comfortable with that, and I feel it's really important to bring this out. So I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Jean. I'm very grateful for your transparency because one of the things I've learned is that which does not get discussed never gets healed.
Yes,
so These topics are important to bring up.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about ways to deal with that and why that happens in someone's life, how prevalent it is, and maybe some misinformation that's out there or misunderstanding about it, and how we can deal with these kinds of things. So that's very, very good. But first, let's just talk about you, Sally, growing up. And I just like to hear, you know, this is Courageous Creative Conquerors. And so tell me a little bit about Sally growing up and how you were creative.
Oh, well, I grew up in a wonderful, close-knit family. My grandmother was very creative. She always crocheted and made gifts and embroidered aprons. And also my mother was very creative in the kitchen, an excellent cook. And most of my aunts and grandmothers made their own gifts. And so I joined in, and I used to make pillows as a young girl and did a little bit of knitting and loved working with clay and just ways to express myself.
Yes, and how helpful was that to you in letting you release emotions and express your feelings?
You know, it was much more profound than I knew at that age. I loved being creative. I also dabbled at poetry a bit, and I didn't know why, but it did give me a sense of relief.
Yeah.
And there was a healing aspect to it.
Yes, I totally agree. And sometimes, as you say, we don't realize the power of it until we're older, and we need that. We fall back on it, and we can always welcome the arts back into our lives and use that as a really effective healing tool and coping strategy. You know, it's just very powerful. So thank you for that. So let's take a look at some photos of you and just briefly go over your life journey a little bit. And we're going to start with this photo here. Can you tell us a little bit about this, Sally?
Yes, those are my grandparents, my mother's parents, and I was very close to both sets of grandparents. And this was a picture that was taken after I had gone and bought them dinner with the proceeds from my first job. I think it was making like $1.75 an hour, and I would save my money, and it was my joy to take them a meal. And we just enjoyed, sitting around a little table in the kitchen and just having some sweet time together. Not a lot of deep conversation, but just being with them was my joy.
Why were your grandparents so special to you?
I think it was a history that they represented. I felt they were very strong people. This set of grandparents had 11 children, and they had very sad times of poverty, especially after the Depression. And they were extremely hardworking, honorable people. And so I admired that. I admired the strength. And I never really heard them complaining. I just knew the circumstances, and I knew I wanted to be like that.
So they were strong, spiritually, mentally, emotionally strong, persevering
Yes,
through hardship. And maybe you learned a little bit about that from them.
I did. I learned more about their work ethic. They didn't have, I guess you would say, a religious foundation necessarily, but they were honorable people and did what they needed to do to take care of their family.
Important qualities to have.
Yes.
So let's look at this here.
Mm-hmm.
Who is in this picture? I see you there.
Yes, my mom and my dad and my sister RC, and she and I are very close. And they had come to visit me at graduate school. I was in law school in San Diego, California at the time. Later, I would find out that I had dyslexia. I was never diagnosed formally with it. And so I wasn't able to finish that education because I couldn't finish reading the test packets.
Oh my goodness.
Yes, I was always a very slow reader and took my time and used all kinds of colored markers and read out loud to myself. But of course, in that kind of test setting, I couldn't do that.
Now that's very interesting because you became a writer, and a writer also of children's books.
Yes.
And I'm sure that your passion for children and reading, helping them read, comes through in your efforts in creating those books.
Yes, actually, after my youngest son was born, I went back to school and did some postgraduate work and became a special needs specialist. And I tutored children with dyslexia and dyspraxia and ADD. So I felt I could relate to them. And
Yes.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's lovely. And so sometimes out of our struggles and our weaknesses, like your dyslexia, sometimes, there's a divine plan. There's something there. It shifts us in a different direction. So I love hearing that story about you.
Thank you. And you're so right. I had gone to law school with the passion of working for women who were involved in domestic violence. And I truly felt that God changed my arena of advocacy. And I became an advocate for parents and children with learning challenges.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
All right, so let's look at this next picture over here. So here we see you with your first Mother's Day experience with your sister and your mother. And next, a photo with you and your husband, Richard. You look so comfy and relaxed. And here's a photograph with your father and your husband in 2017. And I understand that you're going through some changes and taking care of him right now. And here is a photo at a pivotal moment in your life with your son, Angelo, at the book launch of From Crisis to Compassion. We're going to hear a little bit more about that later. And next, this remarkable moment with your son, Ryan, and two children. One he hadn't met because the child was born while serving in the military and returning home. What a beautiful moment. And finally, this photo of you with Ryan, Elizabeth, your daughter-in-law, and 2 granddaughters. We can have trauma in family, but we can also find family or extended family to help us heal and feel and bring joy into our lives. And what a beautiful moment that is. And how supportive have your family been with your efforts with writing and your books and things?
You know, a good question. Very supportive. They believed this story needed to be told, and they've seen the amount of healing that has happened, not just within the family, but with other people as well. And incidentally, several family members came forward after this book was released and started sharing their stories, which were heartbreaking. And yet we'd known each other 50, 60 years and had never shared any of this.
That is just so powerful.
Our culture bears the scars of a whole group of people who have been sexually abused. And the Center for Disease Control, their statistics show that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused by the age of 18. And as horrifying as those stats are, they're not accurate, because very high percentage of people who've been sexually abused have never reported it. And so another study was done, and it was on a smaller scale, but I believe much more accurate. And it was done in the Bay Area of California. And it shows more like 1 in 2 people, girls particularly, will be sexually abused by the age of 18. The reason that statistic is important is because the boundary lines have been broken for so many children. So they are highly susceptible to sexual contact and not be able to discern if it's healthy or appropriate.
Yes. Oh my goodness. It's just so difficult, I think, for us to hearing this. I agree. I believe that this is true, these statistics, but it's difficult for us with our hearts to accept this. It brings tears. It's difficult. And I think that's why it's kind of been pushed to the side, and why we continue to make this prevalent in our country and in our world, that it's difficult to take steps to stop this. We put blinders on. You know?
Yeah, great point, Jean. And I analogize it to the Holocaust, where over 60 million Jews were killed and annihilated. And during that time, I remember asking my parents and grandparents what they did. And many of them said they didn't want to watch the news. They didn't want to hear about it. It was too horrifying. And they couldn't process it. It was almost like something was happening on the other side of the world that they couldn't control. This is happening in our backyard, and we can control it. We can do our.
We're talking about things that are painful and that are sad, but we're talking about it because we care, and that we know that there's hope. And you and I are examples of that, of a life journey of going through it and coming out and finding ways to be of service, and finding ways where we've shifted and accepted and embraced forgiveness, embraced who we are and our mission in life, and living that, and sharing, different tools and tips of hope. And we don't have to, when we say the word sharing, it's not going into gory details or anything. It's just sharing, hey, yeah, this happened to me. I've moved on, and this is what helped me. And then people step forward and say, oh my goodness, I didn't know. And it happened to me too. And maybe they never got it out. They never felt safe. And like you say, holding that in can cause all kinds of different problems: physical, mental, emotional. Yeah.
Yes, you are so right. I've really been privileged since writing this book to be involved in other things. And one of them is I've shepherded a group of women using Dan Allender's book, The Wounded Heart. And it's really revealed to me the depth of problems that are created by not sharing some of this trauma that occurs. And sometimes it's multiple types of trauma. And so that's what I wanted for my book, From Crisis to Compassion, to give hope, because the woman in this story, it's a third person narrative, and the woman I talk about is Naomi Parker. She goes back into those areas where she was wounded. And she goes back and becomes a specialist and teaches in that arena. She did have an unplanned pregnancy and an unwanted abortion. And so she volunteers at a crisis pregnancy center as a post-abortion counselor. So there's areas where we see that we can do things with the experiences we've had that weren't ideal, and that if we had to do life over again, we would change. But since we can't, and that's part of the fabric of our story, that we want to use it for good in the ways that we can. And as you mentioned so beautifully, when we are able to be honest in the right setting and with trusted people, it's almost like an invisible door opens between us, where we can now start sharing things about our lives and our struggles, where we can relate to each other at deeper ways. The guilt and shame tend to be identifiers for adults who now see life through the lens of these shameful glasses, if you will. And they take on this persona that they need to rectify what's happened to them. And it changes the focus of really who they are. They become oftentimes victimized by the event, and then will use that identity as a victim to justify a very poor choices of coping mechanisms.
Exactly. Poor coping strategies. Yes.
So we see it all over this culture. We see addictions to pornography and drugs and alcohol and online shopping.
Yes.
And social media.
And just even unhealthy behaviors, it can be mild or it can be extreme, but just poor choices after that. And learning to love and accept and forgive is so important. And knowing that we are not the cause, we are not, the ones to blame, but taking responsibility for our journey instead of getting stuck in the victim and pointing, and getting stuck there.
Right.
That can be a really hard place to get out of, to be stuck in that blame thing. Or the opposite of blaming ourselves and stuck there. Either way does not work. It has to be stepping forward. I was wondering, there might be some people out there that say, well, this doesn't have anything to do with me. It's not happening in my neighborhood.
Yeah, thank you for asking. As most of your listeners may or may not know, all the proceeds of everything I do, whether it's speaking, life coaching, or writing these 14 books, go to a wonderful organization that is fighting child sex trafficking in 5 countries. And the reason that has been so important to my husband and I is because we found out about 15 years ago that this was $150 billion industry that has it's a huge criminal enterprise. Activates through social media. So it's not like that we see in old movies that somebody in an old van drives up and scoops up a child in their front yard. It's really not that obvious anymore. It's much more subversive. It's very prevalent in the United States, more so than I think we ever want to admit. We always want to think, oh, that's in Thailand, that's happening in India, that's in some third world country, but it's not true. And unfortunately, some of the highest days where child sex trafficking occurs are for big sporting events, like Super Bowl, where men are coming in from all over and staying in hotels to see the game.
Yes. And, I'm noticing, and I think the ones who are listening and viewing this right now have noticed that over the past few years, even, or 5 years, more people are coming out and talking about this. We're getting a greater awareness that this is happening, and even celebrities and more in the news, more people are being identified and speaking, and more people are speaking up and saying, yes, this did happen to me, or yes, I'm aware of this. And that's why working with the arts is so important. And I know you know the power of writing and working with arts with these children and adults is very helpful. Why did you choose to make this your life work? And how did that shift for you?
Those are good questions that you're asking. I've always had a heart for people who've suffered, not knowing the depth of what was inside my own heart.
Mm.
So I started seeing there were different arenas where my heart was drawn to, but I never really tapped on the real source of where this compassion came from, because I had not dealt with my own pain and I had not dealt with my own story. And
there you go. Yeah.
And yeah, so that brings us full circle to the importance of our stories. And why it is that we need to acknowledge them and embrace them, because it is our history. And we want to give space and honor to the grief that we've experienced during our journey, because it makes us who we are. And
beautifully said. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't feel like I would be a person of compassion if I continued to stuff down my own pain. And so I did want to write the story of a young girl who had experienced trauma, but I also wanted to touch on the other end of the spectrum, and that was children's literature. Because I remember I didn't have a lot of books when I was a child that dealt with young girls who were encouraged in a family setting and could do things that their heart drew them to. And so that was one of the reasons why I wrote the 9-book series I wrote of Sarah's Amazing Animal Adventures. And it's on Amazon, and it does have a coloring and activity book to go with it. And the reason I bring up this particular series I wrote is because she's a young girl who's an only child and is very lonely and wants an animal for Christmas. Well, her parents get her an animal from a shelter. And there's a magical component in the book where the dogs talk to her solely, and they tell her about their experiences at the shelter. So she starts seeing life that parallels foster care and child sex trafficking through the life of these dogs, but it's never mentioned. It's just journeys. So an adult would pick up on the tragedy of these dogs, where a child would just see the compassion that Sarah has for her animals. So there's kind of 2 levels of these stories that have been written, but they do deal with grief within a family of her loss of her grandfather and then the loss of one of the dogs.
So, your stories are about allowing children the freedom to feel and express, and seeing some tragedy or some challenges with the animals and their experiences, and hopefully in reading that they're being allowed to speak up and share feelings.
Yes, and that's such a good point you raised, because at the end of all of my books for the children, there are questions for parents to engage their child. And I've had parents come up to me and say, this was really cool on a couple of levels. 1, I wouldn't have asked my child the questions that you're asking. And 2, it didn't have to come from me, the parent. It came from the author. So it was like a third party was asking the question, and it took away the tension between the parent and the child.
We have so much in common. And I did the same thing, writing a series of bully busting adventures, and the latest, Friends Have Feelings. You go through, and the pig meets the different animals, and one of them is mad and one of them is sad. And so both you and I have that passion and compassion for helping children feel good about sharing feelings. And as you say, you're not writing about sex trafficking in the book. It's just a book about
Yeah.
feelings and family and animals and things. And I think that's so important. So thank you so much. And you're just remarkable with all these books you've written. And it's just such a blessing for so many.
Oh,
So yeah. So one of the things that I'm just so excited about is you're going to be in this book, my book that's coming out, Courageous Creative Conquerors. And this book is a collaboration of 48 artists and writers. And many of them have experienced trauma. Of course, we all have experienced trauma of some kind or another, in our lives, loss of job, death of a loved one, some different things. And some have experienced more critical traumas, some of the ones that Sally's been talking about today. But this book is coming out soon, and Sally is one of the 48 contributors. So I want to show her page and invite her to read her writing, which is about stories. And she's told you so much about why stories are important to her. Could you read this to us, Sally? That would be lovely to hear you.
Sure. It's about stories. Stories are powerful. They offer deep revelation and insight. Stories stir our souls, and they help us to live out truth. If we are willing, they can open our eyes and unplug our ears by removing the blinders with which we've grown comfortable. Stories can move us to take action, feel grief and compassion for others, fill us with hope and understanding, and show us how to live deeper lives of appreciation for those around us.
Beautiful. Yes. I love this. And I'm so glad that you are in the book and that you wrote about stories, because so often people that have been through trauma, whatever type of trauma it is, could be physical challenges that suddenly you're in a wheelchair, you're not able to do what you used to do. Mm-hmm. Any kind of trauma that we have, journaling, writing, or just talking and sharing our stories can be just a powerful and positive and healthy coping strategy.
Absolutely. We each have a rich history that we bring to the table. And in sharing our stories, we're able to interweave our lives with others. And that vulnerability opens the door to true connection, where people want to engage us because they can relate.
Sometimes when we have these experiences, we have a little trouble with that connection with God and forgiveness and moving through and healing with that. So could you share a little bit about that for our viewers?
Yes, I'd be glad to. Mm-hmm. It has been a process. It has not been an easy process. And it wasn't until, for me, this 6th decade of my life, that things started coming together in a way where I was no longer afraid. I was no longer afraid of disappointing others, because I realized through my faith that I really only serve an audience of one, and that's my Lord and Savior. And so I don't worry anymore about what other people are going to think. We can bring what we have to the table. Yeah. And I hope it encourages someone, because we all have been given gifts by our Creator, whether it's writing or singing or drawing or whatever it is, that we can bring joy to this world. And if we use it in a way that helps somebody else, then all the better. So for me, it's been a journey. The forgiveness part was tough, but I realized that the forgiveness was much more for my growth than it was for anybody else. And it didn't mean I was letting anybody off the hook. It just meant I needed to let go of the things that were restraining me.
Yes. And forgiving yourself. Did that come into play? Yeah.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. Many of my decisions, I felt really put me in a whole different arena and set me back. And yet I didn't know how to change that, because I was on a track of doing the same thing. and looking to the world for satisfaction. And it always left me wanting. So,
Oh, that's really powerful what you just said. So because something happened and we feel less than, and we feel unworthy. And then we start getting on this track, this road of making poor decisions. And it happens again.
Yes.
And again and again.
So for me, it would be to pray, to listen, and to move in the areas of my heart of what I feel would be the most compassionate thing to do in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, listen to the heart. Listen to what we love. Listen to that gentle nudging from spirit telling us what to do. Right. Take time to be silent. Listen. So before we stop, I want to invite you to share your website and how people can find out more and contact you if they'd like to do so.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's sallybetters.com/coach. And on the website, you'll see the books I've written. And I've just launched a course, an online course for those who would like to go through the issues that are raised in this book, From Crisis to Compassion. If they'd like to do that anonymously, they can purchase my online course. It has 13 modules and various important exercises to work through. Or you can contact me for a life coaching individually.
So thank you again, Sally, and thank you for sharing with us today. It's been very helpful, and I'm just so grateful to you.
Thank you. I'm grateful for you, and it's an honor to be a part of your beautiful book.
Thank you. And thank you, all of you, for joining us today and supporting the expressive arts. And we hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
To see more Courageous Creative Conquerors videos, join the weekly creative community calls, or learn more about private sessions, visit JeanVoiceGuard.com.